Manuel A. Roxas was born on January 1, 1892 in Capiz, Capiz. He was born to Rosario Acuna and Gerardo Roxas. Sadly, his father died a year before his birth due to having been mortally wounded by Spanish Guardia Civils. Talk about harsh. He and his older brother Mamerto was raised by their mother and their grandfather, Don Eleuterio Acuna. The young Manuel received his early education in the public schools of Capiz, and at age 12, he attended St. Joseph's Academy in Taiwan. But due to homesickness, he went back to the Philippines and eventually transferred to Manila High School, graduating with honors in 1909. Roxas began his law studies at a private law school established by George A. Malcolm, the first dean of the University of the Philippines College of Law. On his second year, he enrolled at the University of the Philippines, where he was elected president of both his class and the student council. Imagine the stress. And guess what? In 1913, Roxas did not only obtain his law degree and graduated class valedictorian, he subsequently topped the bar examinations with a grade of 92% on the same year. He became a provincial governor in the days of the Commonwealth, was later elected to sit at the House of the Representatives, and was chosen to be the Speaker of the body on his first term.
He then worked as legal researcher to the eminent Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Don Cayetano Arellano. A year later, he joined the law firm of Don Juan Sumulong as a trial lawyer. His grandfather's death, however, forced him to change careers. Back home in Capiz, he discovered the world of politics. At 27, he became the youngest governor and was elected president of the Governor's Convention. His whirlwind courtship and marriage to Trinidad de Leon, daughter of Senator Seferino de Leon of Bulacan, produced two children, Rosario, nicknamed Ruby, and Gerardo, also known as Jerry, who later followed in his father's footsteps and became senator. In 1922, he was elected representative of Capiz and became Speaker of the House of Representatives, a post he held for 12 years. In the years that followed, the campaign for Philippine independence was fought in the U.S. Congress. Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Roxas led independence missions to Washington, D.C. Here, he proved his mettle as an outstanding leader. Even American officials admired his eloquence and his grasp of problems and issues confronting both Filipinos and the American people. In 1932, they successfully secured the passage of hair horse cutting law from the U.S. Congress, which granted Philippine independence. Unfortunately, the Philippine Congress, under the leadership of Manuel Quezon, rejected it. Worse, Roxas was ousted from the speakership. As he walked out of the legislative building, he was hoisted on the shoulders of students and admirers who carried him all the way to his home along Taft Avenue. 1 year later, Quezon obtained from the U.S. Congress a similar law called Tidings-McDuffie Independence Law. It was readily accepted by the Philippine Congress. The law called for a constitutional convention in 1934. Manuel Roxas was elected to represent Capiz and became a member of a committee known as the Seven Wise Men, who led the drafting of the 1935 Constitution that established the 10-year Commonwealth period and the independent republic thereafter. Quezon was elected in 1935 as President of the Commonwealth and Sergio Osmeña as Vice President. Running this time with the opposition, Manuel Roxas won again as an assemblyman representing Capiz. Notwithstanding their belonging to different political parties, Quezon offered oppositionist Roxas the finance portfolio. As finance secretary, Roxas showed his brand of economic nationalism when he espoused ang Bagong Katipunan, the forerunner of the late President Carlos P. Garcia's Filipino First policy. On December 8, 1941, the Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor. On the same day, the Philippines was also bombed. It was a day of infamy and the beginning of 3 oppressive years of Japanese occupation in the Philippines. It was also the beginning of a very important and decisive chapter in the public career of Manuel Roxas. Roxas was assigned as MacArthur's aide and liaison officer between the USAFE and the Commonwealth government. He was responsible for sourcing food supplies from Capiz for some 120,000 soldiers under siege in Corregidor and Bataan. When a full Japanese invasion was evident, Quezon and his cabinet asked Roxas to join them in exile to America. Roxas declined, reasoning it was his duty to remain behind the embattled soldiers and the Filipino people. President Quezon thus conferred on Roxas the presidential powers of government in his and Vice President Osmeña's absence. After Quezon and Osmeña left, Roxas toured Mindanao and Visayas to help boost the morale of the people. Despite the grave danger to his life, Roxas refused all opportunities for him to be evacuated to Australia. Finally, he was captured and immediately brought to the Imperial Headquarters in Davao under Colonel Nobuhiko Jimbo, Chief of Staff of the Japanese Mindanao Command. He was sentenced to death by the Japanese High Command. However, Colonel Jimbo admired Roxas so much that he did everything to save him from execution. Brought back to Manila under house arrest, he continued to reject collaboration with the Japanese and started to work with the guerrilla movement. He became its titular head and operationally headed its Manila intelligence group. The liberation of the Philippines under General MacArthur started in February 3, 1945. At the height of the siege of Baguio, Roxas was able to escape from his Japanese guards. He walked for 3 days in the mountains and finally found his way back to Manila to meet MacArthur. After the war, Vice President Osmeña came home to replace Quezon, who had died in the U.S. When Congress reopened, Roxas was voted overwhelmingly as Senate President. On April 1946, the elections for President of the Republic was held. Manuel Roxas defeated Sergio Osmeña. Roxas was proclaimed the last President of the Commonwealth on May 28, 1946. Immediately, Roxas wasted no time to rebuild the country amid the ruins and ravages of war.
For the rehabilitation of our economic life and for the repayment of war damages will not, in themselves, produce an immediate reconstruction of our economy. Meanwhile, the needs of the Philippine people are immediate. We must have food. We must have funds with which to finance the activities of government, to provide for the restoration of law and order, the encouragement of production, and the beginning of a program of social reform.
He helped feed the many poor people affected by the war. He reorganized the bureaucracy, established the central bank and the Rehabilitation Finance Corporation to hasten normalization, and built new schools for children left idle during the war. He worked long hours to streamline government operations to serve the poor first, enlisted the help of wealthier people towards faster rehabilitation, and negotiated foreign treaties and various forms of support from other friendly countries. On July 4, 1946, he finally tasted the symbolic fruit of all his labor and the collective struggles of the Filipino people, their blood, sweat, and tears.
To proclaim the independence of the Philippines as a separate and self-governing nation.
Before a large crowd in Luneta, the American flag was slowly lowered down by the U.S. ambassador. At the same time, President Manuel Roxas slowly and gently raised the Philippine flag until it reached the very top of the silver pole, flying majestically to the triumphant beat of the Philippine national anthem. The Philippines was finally an independent country.